So I want to wish everybody a good morning and thank you for being with us today. We are with the Office of Online Education and we're here today to talk about creating discussions with all of the tools that are really available to you inside of Canvas and creating the best discussions that you can to really help benefit your students in the classroom. So I'm here today with Matt Gromlick and Heather Whitesides for our co-hosts. My name is Suzanne Becker. I'm an embedded educational technologist, which means that I work within specific colleges, working with folks to help integrate technology and pedagogy into your online courses or your remote courses or your hybrid courses or even face-to-face courses for folks that also use a Canvas component in the classroom. I work primarily with the College of Urban Affairs. Well, actually, I work completely with the College of Urban Affairs, and I am also working with the College of Liberal Arts this summer as the interim embed tech. I will let Matt take a moment and introduce himself as well.
Thanks, Suzanne. I'm Matt Gromlick. I work primarily with the College of Education and the College of Hospitality right now.
So today we're going to be talking about, as the webinar suggests, discussions with inside of Canvas. Discussions are a pretty popular tool and we use them all the time. And so we're going to look at some examples of discussions that can be used inside of Canvas. We're going to talk about what really makes a good discussion, what are some of the tools and the best practices that are available to you. And really inside of Canvas, right, how do you go about, what is available to you? What are the different ways you can set up a discussion? So when I say set up a discussion, I'm not necessarily talking about the clicks that are needed to create a discussion in Webcampus, but sort of a next level of you've created the discussion. What are the different ways that you can deploy your discussion? What types of different discussions are available to you to help engage students? So that's mostly what we're going to be focusing on. But today we're going to start by talking about some of the best practices associated with discussions and then provide examples for you of 4 different types of discussions that you can pretty immediately use in your class, right? And so the discussion, I think for almost everybody in class, and really whether you're in a face-to-face class or an online class, that discussion is really a crucial exercise for allowing students to engage with their peers, with the content, and with their instructor. And student learning outcomes improve when they actively participate in collaborative activities, right? Or create dialogues with each other or with the instructor. And one great way to do this in classes is through discussions and discussions that can personalize the content or anything that can really help challenge and expand the way students interact with each other and think about the content. And so there's a lot of literature about discussions, and some of the main themes really focus on the ways in which discussions provide a very important platform for students to construct meanings in groups, right? And using those groups to help integrate new knowledge. In the context of adult learning in particular, knowledge is constructed within social context and through sustained types of interactions. And whenever folks participate like this and share knowledge through this network of social exchange, it's incredibly effective for engaging with the course content. And I think what's really interesting is when we're teaching face to face, we all know that there are students that sort of hang on the periphery and don't always contribute, whether they're engaged or not, but there are always those students that are exceptionally quiet and sort of reticent and hesitant to participate and remain on the periphery. In the online setting, though, what we often see is that discussions provide a crucial entry point for those students who may not readily speak up or participate in class. And so you tend to actually get sort of full scale engagement from a wider range of students within the course. And so as we move forward, we're going to talk about what some of these examples look like to engage students. And we're going to, really think about what it takes to make a good discussion. And you'll see how these points play out in just a moment when Matt takes us through some examples. But it's crucial to think about the purpose of your discussion, right? What is it that you actually want students to do? Why are you having them engage in this discussion? Is it to interact with each other, to interact with you, to engage with the content, to analyze something? Whatever, the purpose is important. And it's as important as being clear about the questions or issues that are posed in the discussion that you would like them to address. And your expectations for the post, right, are incredibly important in thinking about how you want them to engage with the content, how you want them to engage with their peers. And it's also crucial to let them know how you are going to evaluate them, right? How are you going to assess their posts and their responses? And then a final point to really consider is, again, the role that you as an instructor are going to take in the discussion thread. And again, we're going to talk more in depth about each of these points in just a moment, but that role is crucial, right? Thinking about whether or not you're going to hop in and say, hey, you guys, did you see this great point that James just made? What do you guys think about this? Or point out something maybe in the quote unquote real world outside of the classroom that maybe pertains to something that you're discussing for that week, right? But it's important to think about how are you going to participate and what is your role? And of course, that will vary from depending on the type of class and the size of class, but it's something to consider and let your students know.
If we're defining discussion for this webinar's sake, discussion in this case is actually the discussion feature inside of Canvas Webcampus. So on your navigation column, the left-hand side, there's discussions. And so that discussions feature is what we're really going to be talking about today. So you can use this. Every course has a Canvas shell, whether you are face-to-face, remote, online. Every course has a Canvas shell that you can use. And then as far as what you can do with discussions, that's going to be the second half of this. So Suzanne talked about kind of the theory behind what are discussions, how do we want to interact with our students, how do we want students to interact with content, with each other. So what I've done is I've actually created examples inside of Canvas in that discussions tool of all of these different types of examples. So you can kind of see what a Canvas discussion looks like and all the various components and all the different types of media that you can use. You can have asynchronous or synchronous discussions depending on your course, your students, your designation. So there are a lot of options inside of Canvas using this discussions tool. Again, the types of discussions that we're going to talk about, or kind of how I think about breaking them down, are really how are students interacting? So they primarily interacting with content, with other students, with you as the instructor, or is it truly a mix of two or all of these things? So again, all of these are going to be built inside of the discussion tool in Canvas right there. And if you need more information on how you actually build this inside of Canvas, as Suzanne said, OIT has a training on like the buttons that you click in order to build the discussions. I'm going to show you the final result of discussions that I've built, talk about the components and why I set up the discussions in the way that I did. So for the student content interaction discussions, the most common type is this because we tend to want students to read an article, watch a video, read a chapter in the textbook, do a case study, and then reflect or analyze or synthesize what they learned. So a lot of discussions tend to be in the online environment tend to be student content interaction, or at least the first type of discussion that people think about when they're thinking about how students are interacting. But the types of questions that you would pose for your students to answer in relation to the content would be maybe identifying an important concept or asking them to think about why they have the beliefs that they do, applying something that they learned, or maybe talking about future questions that they have. So truly interacting with content and then reflecting on that interaction or that synthesis. So what does that look like inside of Canvas using this discussion tool? This is one example. So I have this reading reflection. So I primarily want students to interact with the content. That's my primary goal. I can have secondary goals, but as I'm thinking about what students are doing in the course, what they're completing, having that primary interaction is a really good first place to start. So Here, they're primarily interacting with the content. There are 5 key components that I put into place. So if you look, I have an overview, requirements, grading, a due date, and how you participate. And then I'm going to break these down. So for the overview, I tend to just provide any background information that they need and provide any documentation that they need. So for example, if you look here, I have students, they're going to read this article. I primarily teach math courses or math methods courses. So wanting students to think about how numbers are positioned and why prices end in 99 a lot of times. So I have this article, they're going to read the article, and then they're going to post the 3, 2, 1 based on the reading, which I'll talk about in a second. The cool thing about Canvas is that you can upload any type of media, files, videos, you can do hyperlinks, you can embed YouTube videos, you can create your own videos, and then you can embed them as well. So the document here is all of the components of what they need to do to interact with the content, and then they can reflect on it in this discussion post. So I've linked it right here. Students just click on the why do most prices end in 99, and it opens that document for them. They don't have to go to the files tab. They don't have to go back to the module or back to the main page or try to look around or, click an email and open things. Everything is built into the system. So you just upload the file and then link it. A lot of times when I have students interact with content, I ask them to do a 3, 2, 1. And so something that I've kind of developed over the years, my 3, 2, 1, I put the requirements inside of the syllabus, but then I also just spell out the requirements again every single time that I have a discussion post that's requiring a 3, 2, 1. They probably know what's expected of them. They do it, every week or every other week or however often I'm requiring them to do it. But it's always good just to provide that information again so that they don't have to go back to the syllabus. They don't have to go back to last week's discussion post and like, oh, is it the same? Did I make sure that I got all the pieces? Everything's right here spelled out for the students. So in my 3, 2, 1, I have them talk about 3 pieces of information that they learned, 2 questions they have for their fellow classmates, and then a big synthesis or takeaway of the reading. In this example, I put that they're not required to respond to peers. Totally up to you. Primarily, I want students to interact with the content. I want to see how they're synthesizing and analyzing the information. I really like having these 2 questions because it spurs potential conversations in the future. I can highlight some of those if I send out an announcement or for next week's reading, this person had a really great question that I wanted to address. So I use this as students are interacting, they're synthesizing, and then I'll take that information and process it in a way that's not just them, hey, great question, cool. It's more of an optional response for this one in this case. But again, totally up to you how you want to use it. Great question about just the mechanics of discussion boards. So in discussion boards, in this discussion feature tool inside of Canvas, when students post, everyone can see their post. And I'll talk about some of the nuances behind that, but that's primarily the biggest difference between discussions and something like the assignments feature, which is there as well. Assignments, students submit an assignment and it goes directly to you as the instructor, nobody else sees it. Discussions are for everyone or groups. Again, there's some nuances to it, but it's more open so that everyone can see. I have my grading, 6 points, 3, 2, 1, that's 6, so they know how they're graded. Due date, even though the due date is also on the discussion itself, I just like adding it in so they know. And then what's really been beneficial is the how to participate section. This I just copy and paste from one discussion post to another, so I just type it up once and then I'm good to go. But we sometimes assume that our students know all the technology or maybe know more than us or that they're great inside of Canvas, this might be their first course online or first course in Canvas. And while students are super tech savvy, a lot of the time, it's just really nice to provide all the information that they need to succeed without them having to go Google it or email you and ask you. Everything is right here inside of this discussion direction, so they know exactly how to participate and submit their discussion post. So again, I just copy and paste it from one to the next. But how do you participate? Well, you would click reply. It will open a text box. You would type in whatever you need in the text box, click post reply, and then they're good. I also provided that optional. If you would like to comment on a peers thread, it's optional. It's great if you do. It's not required for full credit because, again, I'm primarily wanting them to interact with the content. But for me, this is optional. And what I found is that even if it's optional, a lot of students do start answering the two questions that people are putting up. So even though it's optional, they're still interacting with each other. But for me, it's not mandatory. So if you look, I have some students who've responded. So Philip posted, Alina responded even though she didn't have to. Philip responded back. So there is this back and forth. But again, for me, for this purpose, it wasn't required that they respond. Tons of responses. They're 3, 2, 1s. And I could just go down the list and kind of look and see how they interacted with each other and what they posted. But I can also use the gradebook feature to see what each student posted. I'm not going to spend tons of time on the gradebook, but what I do want to show you today is what does it look like when students have replied to the discussion post? How do I see what they've written? And then how do I see if they've replied to each other? So on this navigation column on the left-hand side, grades will bring us to the gradebook. And again, just super brief overview. If there's a dash anywhere, it means the student has not completed that or not turned that in, not replied in this case to the discussion. If there's a number, it means I've already graded it. Or if there's a check, it means that I made that discussion pass fail, full credit or no credit. So I've already graded this. And then if there's this notebook with the exclamation point, it means that the student has submitted or replied, done what they needed to do for that discussion, and it has not been graded. So here is the reading reflection student content example. So I've graded 3, but there are 4 that I haven't graded. And if I want to go in and just see what they wrote, I can just click on that notebook arrow, speed grader. Again, Wednesday morning, they're going to go through this a lot more in depth. But inside of the speed grader, I can see exactly what that student posted. I can go from one student to another. And I know that Alina replied to some other people. So here's her initial post, and then here her responses or her response to Philip. So I can see in this view what that individual student did inside of that discussion thread. I can grade right there, and then I can add a comment. If I add a comment inside of the gradebook, then that is just between me and that student. If I were in the actual discussion thread itself and I replied to something here, then everybody could see it. So you do have that option of replying so that all of the students can see how you replied, or inside of the gradebook, you also have the option of just sending them an individual comment. I'm gonna pause for a sec. Heather, is there anything that you want me to address specifically or any questions or anything that's come up?
We have a really good question, and I'm so grateful we have a lot of contributions about what is the perfect group size. We've had some contributions, but it definitely can vary. So if you want to lean into the pros and cons of different group sizes, we also had a small conversation about using groups and collaboration, and we talked about that you're going to share an example about that later.
And Heather, keep me on track. One is about groups and group sizes, and then like number two, collaboration group work. So I'll show you some examples of those nuances or those features inside of that discussion tool. So one of them is you can create groups, and then your discussion would be assigned to separate groups. So I'll show you an example. So I'll pause on that for a second. Leaning into the what is an optimal group size, there's no right answer. And I think that my answer is do what works best for you, maybe some trial and error, see how your students are responding. A lot of this is new to us and the students. And so to some extent, you're just going to have to figure out your rhythm and what works best. However, some guidelines, if you're just wanting them to interact with the content, then you may not even need groups. You just want to see how they're interacting. You're kind of taking that critical eye on their analysis or their responses and going through. That might not be a group discussion. If you're really wanting them to interact and get super in depth, then smaller groups are better than larger groups. So smaller groups for 3 to 6, maybe, if you're like really wanting those, or if you're wanting, a lot of different voices chiming in, but maybe not as deep. Maybe you have 10 to 15 in a group. It also depends on your class size. So class sizes at UNLV can range from 15 students to 200 students. So not the best answer, but it really depends on you, your students, your class, and then how much interaction you want them to have with each other. And so when we get into the student-student interaction example, I'll show you kind of the setup and what that looks like. Also, something to consider is how are you going to grade or assess this, and how much feedback are you going to give to students on discussions. So discussions are a great way, again, for students to interact with content or each other, for you to provide feedback, and for everyone to see. But it can be overwhelming if you're going to grade every single discussion that everybody posts. So that's a factor to consider as well. Something else is that some people think that you need a discussion every single week. There's nothing saying that you do necessarily. So if it makes more sense that you have a discussion every other week, or some people in the super large classes, half of their class does a discussion one week, half does the other, or maybe there are 10 discussions and by the end of the term you should have 7. I mean, there are tons of ways that you can incorporate these and think about these. The tool is super flexible. The way that we instruct and the topics that we're instructing on, they're super flexible. So let's say try something, see what works for you, see how it goes, and we can always adjust and change and then come back and tell us how things worked and what your practice looks like. So kind of a long non-answer answer to that. But yeah, don't be afraid to try things out and see and test and see what works for you and maybe what doesn't. So there are a few different options inside of the teaching side when you're creating this discussion using the discussion tool. And there are a few options right here. So it says options, there are the 5, and allow threaded replies, meaning that they're replying to each other, it goes down, and then it kind of tabs over so that you see that. And then there's an option where you can select the users must post before saying replies. So depends on you again and what you want to do. But if you don't have that selected, then when students go to the discussion post, they can see everybody else's previous response. If you want to know their first thoughts and responses, if you don't want them to look at everybody else and maybe just like rephrase what somebody else said, you check that. So users must post their own reply first, and then the whole discussion post opens up. So that's an option that you can use inside. You may use it for all, none, or some, depending on what your content is and what you want students to see before they post. One other thing that I want to show you before I move on to the next type of discussion example, and they'll go faster, is student view. So how do I know what students see? Because I think I know what they see as the instructor, but how do I know for sure? For anything inside of Canvas in your shell, you can always click on the student view and you can see any discussion, assignment, announcement, page, assessment. You can look and see that student view. So how do I see student view? Navigation column, left-hand side, under settings. So I just went here, very bottom, there's settings. And then once I clicked on settings, here are all my course settings. Student view is the second on now the right hand column. So I click on student view and now I see what students see. It will bring me back to the home page. So if I wanted to find that discussion post again, then I just navigate to where it is. So this is student view of this discussion. If you look, they can see all of those 5 components. They can click on this and download the file that I added in. They can see how they participate. And then I had already selected the you have to post first. So it says here that the replies are only visible to those who have posted. So this is what the students will see. You can go to any page in student view and make sure that it's what you want it to be. To leave student view, down here, it's like purple ribbon. So I'll leave student view. And again, the way that I got there, navigation column on the left-hand side, I went down to settings and then student view. So lots of time kind of spent on that, but as you'll see as we move through the next examples, all of those components are present. We're just changing some of the media. So when do I use these types of discussions? Just to kind of wrap this up, for student content, I want to see students' thought process or synthesis. I want them to be able to see each other's thought process and synthesis. That's why I'm using this discussion feature instead of something like an assignment feature. They can see each other's thoughts and work. And then I call this a low stakes environment. So it's interacting on a high level, but discussion posts tend to be fairly low stakes in relation to assignments or quizzes, exams, or assessments. Student instructor interaction. So again, what is the primary goal of this discussion? And if the primary goal is for me and the students to interact with each other, then the way that I think about that is some type of feedback. So it's either a question and answer forum, or I'm providing feedback to students, or students are giving me feedback on the course itself, or whatever I would like them to give feedback on. So here's an example, just a quick get to know you fun intro post where I want students to tell me something about themselves and then I want to provide feedback to respond to them. But instead of write a paragraph saying your name and your major, I have this overview. All the components are the same. Overview requirements, grading due date, participating. But for this, instead of writing a paragraph about yourself, I want them to post their favorite school-related and school-appropriate meme, and then write 2 sentences why they selected it. So kind of something fun, a little different. How does that relate to you or describe you? Again, I had that they had to post theirs before they could see others. And then this is the one where in the gradebook you saw the check mark. So I just made it complete or incomplete. Did they do it or not do it? So you do have those options of complete and incomplete or on a sliding point scale. Due date, how you participate, exactly the same, just copied and pasted. And then I also added in down here this helpful hints. So kind of dual purposed in this was one of the first discussion posts that my students did. I'm learning a little bit about them. I'm providing feedback. I'm building that community, but I'm also kind of tricking them into making sure that they're able to upload media into the discussion post. So I added this link, how do I embed an image in a discussion board? So everything's here. They can click on it if they don't know. They can follow the steps. And now I know that all of the students are able to upload images into their discussion board if I want them to do that in the future on something that's more content heavy. So some fun examples. Are you packing up? There's still 0.25 seconds left. Again, the point is to be able to have that student instructor interaction. So making sure that I'm responding to the students after they post. Okay, here's another example. And they're interacting with the content and I'm also providing feedback, primarily providing feedback. So here's my overview. Again, same 5 components. But if you notice now in my overview, I've embedded a YouTube video. Canvas is super robust. You can incorporate so much media into it and into the actual discussion thread itself. So in these directions, it's embedded here. They don't have to go to YouTube. They don't have to click a link and open a new tab. It'll play right in this page. Directions, grading, due date, how you participate, and then my helpful hints. So same components. For this is the selective attention test. And you took like a psych or an ed psych class. It asks the students when they're watching to count the number of passes that the people wearing black clothes complete. So how many times are they passing this basketball back and forth? And so everybody's like focused on the number of passes and they're counting, It's like a minute long, they get to the end. And then it's like, oh, it was this many passes. Did you get it right? Okay, great. But also, did you see the gorilla? And about halfway through, there's a person in a gorilla suit who like walks across the screen, does a little dance, and then walks out. And so just a fun selective attention. And so what I asked for them is to respond to that, their first response. So just like in the other ones, they had to post their own before they could see others, so it wouldn't ruin the ending. But instead of typing up their response, I asked them to create a video response of their reaction. And inside of the discussion thread, it's really easy for students to hit reply and then to record a quick 20-second, minute-long video. They can also upload here. If you're wanting students to create longer videos and videos that are of higher quality, there's Panopto recordings. But for a quick 20, 30-second, hey, this is my response, students would just click reply, hit record upload media, and then start recording. So pretty cool. A really quick response. And then as I'm responding back to them, in my reply as the instructor, I can either type in text or I can upload my own video response back. So lots of options. When do I use student instructor interaction? Again, for me, it's feedback primarily. Still a low stakes environment, but I'm eliciting feedback from students or providing them feedback. Okay, student. So this will answer some of the questions that we had, and we can't get super in depth into all of the features. There's just so many features in Canvas for student-student interaction. But in student-student interaction, we truly want the students to interact with each other. That's our primary goal. And obviously they're going to do so around the content, but we're building the space for students to be able to interact with each other. That can be via text responses, but as you saw, we have audio, webcam, screen captures, YouTube videos, memes and images. And then if you want longer recording and group projects, then Panopto recordings is a great way to do that. And this collaborations feature, which I'll talk about in a second, that's another way to have students interact with each other. So there are just so many ways that students can interact inside of the Canvas platform. Let's go to collaborations now. So collaborations and navigation column, collaborations. So the collaborations feature inside of Canvas is a great way for you as the instructor to set up groups and have students work in those groups on a document. I would go to collaborations, plus collaboration, and the three different kinds of documents that students can work on together are, it says document, but that's like a Word document, spreadsheet, or a presentation. This is all through Google Docs. So students, when they first click on collaborations inside of Canvas, it'll be like, hey, tell me your UNLV email so it can access that through Google Docs. But everything's integrated so well. So students don't actually have to go to their email or their Google Docs. All they have to do is click on collaborations. And once you've created those groups and selected what kind of collaboration you want them to have, they'll see that inside of their Canvas collaborations. So they can work on any of those documents together. Again, it's great because they don't have to share back and forth. They don't have to go through their email to do it. Everything's inside of here. And as the instructor, you can jump into any collaboration that you've created. So if you wanted to jump in and just see how they're working or how something's coming along, or if they have a question, like, hey, can you look at this document really fast? You can jump in and do that. And if they wanted to submit that collaborations, they could do so. They could embed it inside of an assignment or discussion. You can also set up groups inside of the discussion tool. So this is the instructor end. And if you look, I've created this discussion. So the same components, a little bit longer. There are a few more components to this discussion thread. But then I also created groups. So what this means is, and I had a small example class, so I only have 2 groups. You can make as many groups as you want. You can make the group sizes as large or small as you want. So many options there. But when the students go to that discussion thread, they'll all see those directions, but they'll only see what their group thread is. As the instructor, I can jump into any of the group threads. So I can jump into group 1 and look through. And this is Simon Sinek. I had them put a TED Talk and talk about it. And so all of these students are talking about the Simon Sinek TED Talk. But if I jumped into group 2, it's a completely different TED Talk, completely different students, and all of their responses are to this TED Talk. And they can only see that thread. So that's an option inside of your Canvas discussions as well. As the instructor, you can just jump back and forth relatively easily. When might I use student-student interactions? We want them to learn and grow from each other. We want them to take on a variety of roles in the classroom. So inside of Canvas, inside of those groups, you can select a group leader. Either you personally can select a group leader for each group, or you can click a button and have a group leader automatically assigned. So in that last example, I had the group leaders find the TED Talk and then everybody else responded. And then we want students to interact in innovative ways. So again, like getting away from the mentality of online classes are only text. You read something, you post your response, and then you respond to 2 other people. That can be great, but there's so many other ways that we can have students interact with each other, with the content, and incorporate a wide variety of media. It doesn't all have to be text all the time. And finally, I just added a mixed interaction discussion. Sometimes you do want multiple components of things. So what might that look like? Here's a different getting to know your student example: the welcome, overview requirements, how you participate, the helpful hints. So how do I embed an image or a YouTube video or audio file? And I want students to introduce themselves, again, not with a text paragraph, but using 3 different types of media. So one could be text, but then you have to use some other type of media to describe yourself. So for example, Philip here, he has his image talking about Germany. He has a picture of a turtle because he had a turtle, and then he embedded a YouTube video. So 3 different media to describe himself, to explain who he is, to introduce himself to the course. So I wanted them to use a variety of media. I wanted to interact with the students, but I also want the students to interact with each other. So this is where I would, make a requirement for responses if I really want those students to interact. I'm also interacting with the students as well. So he talked about his turtle. So I created a quick 15-second, hey, thanks for posting. This is awesome. Also, what's your turtle's name? And then he responded back. Alina here. Everything's fine. It's cool. Link, and then pictures of her dogs. And I love my dog as well. So obviously when I replied, I had to insert pictures of my dog, and then so on. Memes, so office meme there, I responded, and then just some follow-up questions. So again, building that community, bringing in that teaching presence, interacting with students, but then also having them interact with each other using a wide variety of media. And also in your resources, we're going to give you a discussion checklist if you want to use it. So just quickly, do you have a clear purpose? How are you facilitating and or grading? How are we eliciting student responses, guidelines, interactions, and then how is this going to be graded? And really thinking about what's going to be beneficial grading wise for the student and what's doable for you as a professor too. All of those are components to consider.
Appreciate you taking the time to be here today. Please feel free to reach out to us, and we're here to support you and just provide hopefully all the support that you need to help make this your course is good and bring the best possible practices into your course. So please feel free to reach out to us.